Welcome to Speak Freely. Your host for today is Jim Fishwick. Jim is an award-winning theatre maker and experience designer who specialises in improvised, interactive and immersive performance.
Kia ora koutou katoa and welcome to Speak Freely. This is the 4th edition in our ongoing series of chit-chats, of fiery conversations, of good old-fashioned get-arounds and have a chit-chat arounds. We've been talking to improvisers from all over the world. And in this, the last in the current suite of talks, we're talking to improvisers from around Australasia. It's fun to say, Australasia. Speak Freely is presented by Impro Melbourne, and we have panelists beaming in today from around Australia, including the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation and the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and through them to all First Nations people of Australia. Sovereignty was never ceded. 2 of us, including myself, are coming to you live from Aotearoa, land of the long white cloud. Tihe Moriora, engā mana, engā reo, e ro rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. In tonight's panel, it'll be a game of 2 halves. There will be the first half where we'll be asking the panelists some questions. And then for the second half, the power goes to you. We will be answering your questions live. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask for great improvisers and me, then please put them in the Q&A box down the bottom. You can see a little 2 speech bubbles and the letters Q and A. Please ask your questions at any point. Even if they're half-formed, half-baked, we can make it work. The sooner you put your questions in, the more pressing questions we see that there are from the audience, the sooner we will get to them. If we feel like there aren't any questions coming from you, we'll happily keep this trainer rolling. And speaking of keeping the trainer rolling, will you please welcome my co-host for the Speak Freely series? It is the former artistic director of Impro Melbourne, of Clock 5 Theatre, of the Dynasty Thopathon. It is the one, and as a matter of fact, the only Patti Stiles.
Hey, hey, hey.
Toot, toot. How are you, Patti?
Good, I'm on the train.
Toot, toot. We're all in the driver's seat. How are things?
Good, good. As always, I'm excited about the panel.
Yes.
This week, this panel, we have everybody are theater makers. They have a lot of experience in improvisation as well as other forms, writing, film. But what's interesting is we've got one person who's known for how they direct shows, one person who's stepping into the artistic director chair, and someone who's a director of a festival. So a lot of directing going on.
Well, I'll ask this next question directly. This series is called Speak Freely, which is a play on your book, Improvise Freely. Would you like to say a few words about that?
Yeah, so Improvise Freely, I wrote the book basically to hopefully get people to think of improvisation from different point of views and to start having discussions, to just ask questions and through that broaden our scope of knowledge. So these panels are put together to do that, ask questions, have discussions, look at the work from different point of view. And it was actually hard to pick guests for this panel because all the companies in Australia and New Zealand have an immense body of work that's fantastic, and improvisers that we just love and adore. And, you know, we could easily have 50 people on here and it would be a hootenanny. But I don't know if anybody would understand us, but we'd have fun. So we had to pare it down to a few people, and let's see if we can prompt some thoughts and discussions.
Well, let's see if we can prompt thoughts and discussions from our panelists. And our first panelist is Matias Avaca. Matthias is an Argentinian improviser now living in Aotearoa, who has performed and coached in over 15 countries. He's the co-founder and artistic director of Mabel Impro, the first Spanish-speaking improv group in Australasia, and co-founder and co-director of La Enya Productions, a production company creating opportunities for Spanish speakers to express themselves and to promote Spanish and Latin American culture, art, and languages. Matthias is the director of the Auckland Improv Festival and the Auckland Improv Marathon, and assistant director at the Covert Theatre in, let me check my notes, Auckland. Will you please welcome Matthias Avaca?
Oh, thank you. What a nice, beautiful welcome. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Patti.
My pleasure. Lovely to see you. How are you?
It's great. I'm so honored, actually, when Patti was mentioning the number of beautiful people that we have in this part of the world that could join this meeting. I felt really honored to be one representing some of those groups. So I'm very pleased to be here.
Oh, we're delighted to have you. And our second guest is Alison Bennett. Ali is an actor, clown, performance maker, improviser, and producer. She's particularly interested in the applications of comedy and improvisation in storytelling for both live performance and digital media. She's created and produced full-length new works with her company Hurrah Hurrah, and is currently touring her one-woman comedy show, Introducing Auntie Jude, and has recently taken over the role of artistic director at Improv Theatre Sydney. As a producer, programmer, and teacher, she's worked with the Sydney Opera House, ATYP, NIDA, Kazula Powerhouse, Milk Crate Theatre, PACT, among many, many others. Will you please welcome Ali Bennett?
Hello. Thank you very much for having me. Oh, am I? Oh no, I'm not muted.
You aren't muted. We can hear you.
Good. Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and to be invited. So thank you very much. I'm so happy.
I'm happy too. I was about to say
very
we're
good.
Happy. I don't want to speak for everyone, but
good.
I'm happy you're here.
A good.
That sounded like a dunk on other people. I'm sorry. I'm going to stop talking.
We're happy.
Continue talking by introducing Tim Redmond. Tim saw Jaws at the Forum Theatre in 1975, and it lit a fire in him. He wrote notes and plays in primary school, then made Super 8 horror films as a teenager, and now it's improvisation that keeps the flames cracking. He has been working with Impro Melbourne since 2004. He teaches impro to discover something of meaning and delight, and his classes focus on the connected scene work and the endless stories that can bubble from the simplest moment. Please welcome our final panelist, Tim Redmond. Hi there, Tim. Jim. Lovely to see you.
Yeah, you too, man. Privileged to be here.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. So these are our panelists. I'm going to kick off with a question for anyone on the panel. New Zealand's not quite there, Auckland's not quite there yet, but Sydney and Melbourne are starting to open up again, shows are taking place. And I would like to know what's the one little moment of performance that you're looking forward to, or that maybe you've already encountered returning to stages? What's going to be the small, tiny little thing that you go, ah, yes, I'm back?
Good question. Very good question.
We're hoping for that to happen, to be honest. Being in lockdown here in Auckland, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to open our doors in December for at least a couple of shows. I know it's not a long time to prepare for that, but at least to have some jams with the members in the Covert Theatre. We need that. It's been a long time since it's been at home, to be honest.
I'm actually looking forward to here at ITS in Sydney. As I'm sure everybody is well aware, reopening after lockdown is a great idea in theory, but but there is a sort of sense where you've been closed and then the next day you open and then you're like, well, we need to make a program and some things. And as a result, we're doing some faculty shows, which are just things that anyone that wanted to, they had an idea to experiment with, or just anything stupid that they've had in their mind is a chance to just give it a crack. And one of our staff members, Rue, has come up with this great idea to make a simple murder mystery style kind of show, but I think she just wants someone to die in it and stay dead. And she hasn't quite figured out the format, but I just think there's a great cracking stupidity in there, which I'm looking forward to.
Thank you, Tim or Patti.
I've missed the rehearsal room desperately, and there's no analog for it in shutdown. But that moment, we've been back in the space for 2 weeks now. It's that moment either when a scene starts and you step onto stage, that transition into that space, or just if I'm leading a workshop and we all go, okay, and we just feel something switch on. It's like we're going to work now. That feeling, that little thing there, that's the exhilaration of it. And that's the thing I missed most, and was most frightened it wouldn't come back. But it's back, but I might get in a room and go, oh, it's gone. That part of me is absent, or it's been scared off by solitude, but it's there. It's softer than I would like. I like to come back sharp, but that feeling I missed a lot, just that activation, whatever it is, that stepping on into the thing. That's the thing.
I think for me, connection in the spontaneous moment and the joy of leaping off the cliff into the unknown, holding hands with someone that you really trust.
That's lovely. For me, there's a moment just before the start of a show, just before you go on stage, where there's nothing more you can do to prepare. All the possible work has been done, and there's just like this one moment of quiet before you step on stage where it's suddenly like, I'm the most qualified person in the world to do this show. I'm going to go do it. There's nothing else I can make happen. Because sort of like up to like 5 minutes before you start, it's terrifying. 4 minutes, 3 minutes, terrifying. Right before you start, beautiful moment of calm. Tim, I was wondering if you happen to have a copy of Patti's book with you.
I do.
Excellent. So one of the things in Patti's book, Improvise Freely, is that there are quotes in it from improvisers from all around the world with their opinions on rules. And Tim, I was wondering if you would be willing to read the passage that you contributed to the book.
Absolutely.
I can tell you it's on page 45.
I've got it here.
Jim was the editor on the book.
Yeah, good job, man. Wow. So I
had a copy
read about
open.
yes and.
I didn't just know that off the top of my head.
Oh, both can be true. I was addressing yes and. We were invited to write on Where Did It Lit Us Up, and that's the one that really lodged in my heart. The true obstacle is fear. I think shame, the fear of not belonging, drives us into the panic of either we're not enough or we're too much here, in as much as rules are a guiding principle of structure, and structure can be a real refuge for the panicked soul. But when we put rules up as both tool and goal, oh boy, what an elegant shame trap we're constructing. The imposition of rules recreates the very circumstances that cultivate toxic shame. The you're doing it right or wrong syndrome. You either know or you don't. Shame loves black and white thinking. At their best, rules are a light in the jungle, a way of navigating the unknown to see what the unknown offers us. At their worst, they're weapons exploited by the impro guru for narcissistic status. And yes and is the worst of the lot. Perhaps it's yes and's hallowed ubiquity that troubles me as much as its crudity of application. My biggest beef is it encourages improvisers to relish and develop circumstantial scenarios at the expense of theme, emotion, and play. I once performed in a herald which started with an invocation of a three-legged stool. 13 improvisers each took turns in adding detail to the description of a stool. The stool was alive and inspiring by the third description, but yes and rules demanded we keep going, and by the 13th edition, the idea was dead, dead, dead. Worse, in the face of the overwhelming description of this poor, humble stool, players withdrew to proprietorship of their own ideas. It was a nasty, competitive show, but a faultless demonstration of yes and. Circumstances are not the story. They're the setting and things that cause the story, but obedient, imposed yes and collaboration invariably leads to an expanding puddle of increasingly clever, shame again, competitive, and again, and ultimately meaningless details. Basically, it's a bunch of stuff generator and creates a sort of same banter work that most people may think of and shrug. Let's get back there. Think of and shrug when they hear the word impro. Look, nothing against funny. I love me some funny. I just see it as a pointless to invest in being present with the unknown if the rewards of that risk are limited to witty exchanges. Worse still, the cleverest players typically receive the most positive feedback. With us bended before yes and, we are removed from the intimacy of the moment between our scene partner and us. Our invaluable commitment goes to the math of the scene, not the human, and our fealty before it denies the very magic we come to the theatre to see, sweat in workshops to invite forward, and step on stage to feel. That's the full text.
Thank you for that. It's beautiful.
Thank you very much. It's a lovely bit of writing that was a joy to edit. There's a passage in the middle of there where you talk about a certain, that there's a type of impro that people will, like same banter work that people think of and shrug. And there's something that I've been thinking about for the past few weeks, which is that in some circles, like improv has this reputation as being kind of cringy, or as the kids will say, cringe. Like it's on a level as, like for some reason, it occupies the same space as ska bands, I think, that people go, oh, it's cringy to enjoy unironically, which both of these I do. I absolutely do. Don't get me wrong. The number of special CDs I have. Okay, or for example, I once saw a thing that was like the platonic version of Kiss, Marry, Kill is pick your friend up from the airport, help them move, or go to their improv show. And so what I'm interested in is like, why do we think improvisation specifically has this like cultural association? What do we think it is about the art form that invokes this sort of, oh, okay, response to people?
I think there's a couple of things going on. I think that's a complicated question with like manifold complicated answers. It's something that I am looking at the moment is the product nature of shows. And obviously you need to have shows and you need to sell tickets, and in that sense they need to be a product. But I feel like on some level we've trained our audiences to expect something, and that anything that's not that like clever, like Tim's word, I bought Patti's book, and Tim's words about shame and I'll paraphrase in the positive in regards to clever and in being good is like I could cry when I think about that. I could cry with relief that discussion is now open. You know, I've even as a teacher, I have like not wanted to teach yes and because it was inappropriate and felt that I had to because of its presence. But to go back a step, I feel like we've kind of trained our audiences. We've sort of gone, oh, improv is going to be like theatre. So you're going to have this like expectation that it's got to be good. And as a result, anything that we can like click into, which is a real formulation, is good, therefore. And so it has to be this thing. And I notice it in posters for shows because there's always something like that. And I, yeah. And I often think to myself, what are you doing? And why is your mouth open? And so I wonder if there's not something in there about the expectation that becomes cringy, because to me that does become cringy. And I notice it in like really beginner level students, even just the way they enter the stage is a bit like it's a bit like a poster. Like, and you could say, we're going to do a tragic scene. The only rule of this scene is that somebody has to die painfully, and they'll still come in like that. And so it's, for me, that's cringy to me. There's not a sort of listening beginning. There's a cringe beginning, and I wonder if we've trained our audiences to expect that. And yeah, that's not an answer. It's a wandering mind.
I enjoyed it nonetheless, although I do think it was an answer. Anybody else have any thoughts they'd like to jump in with?
Yeah, I wonder if we've let the audience train us. So I think that sometimes improvisers become too self-aware of their own work, and too self-judgmental of their own work, and they're begging for laughs. And so the audience isn't laughing with us. They're not laughing at what we create. They're actually laughing at us and what people will do to get the laugh. And if you look at some of the games and exercises that people perform, it really is, I'll do anything for a laugh. And there's a real cringeworthiness of that. There was one show I watched where they were throwing marshmallows at performers who had to do a monologue. There was a whole thing that they were doing a scene, then there was a spotlight. Whoever didn't get to the spotlight had to do a monologue, and the audience was given marshmallows, and they were whipping the marshmallows at the performers, but they were encouraged to do that. So what happens when you're in a show where you get to throw objects at performers who have to survive performing, and this is considered entertainment because improvisers will do that?
Yeah, I have thoughts on this, and I think it's related to the question that's been asked in the chat. I think that everyone's experience might be different on this, and personal experience will be different as well. And I think that it also depend on where you're from and what's your background, right? So, for example, I noticed this what Jim mentioned here in New Zealand and maybe the Anglo-Saxon countries that I've been. But for example, for us, back in my hometown or in my country, or probably most countries in Latin America, this might not be the case, because it will depend on a few things. One, like you mentioned, Ali, the poster, how you promote your shows, for sure. The venue that you're playing. So normally we'll have some venues that are theaters that that the quality bar is quite high just to get there. So if you're performing a show, even if it's an improv show, but it's in that specific theater, people can expect a good quality show. So regardless, what's the line of the show, how you promote it, people would just go there just to watch anything that's happening on Friday and Saturday on those venues. So that's really key. And I think that's also the concepts, of course, of the show. So if you pitch your show as a murder mystery, or this is just playing games that we did on workshops and we're just doing for an audience, you get also different expectations, and then you get the friends that are coming along and just to fill the seats, they get a seat there and fill the theater, and they might just go once and that's it. Then the problem is that you train them that you do this kind of shows, but then later, a few years later, when maybe you start doing other kind of shows, how you tell them that this is different than the last time we play games and story die. This is not that. We're actually doing some more complex format structure. I think for the shows that we do back home, that I'm trying to do also here, and that I love watching when I go overseas as well, and hopefully bring some here. It's a theater play. The only thing that's missing is the script. Everything else feels like a theater play. There's props, there's sets, there are costumes. There's a good quality show, I think. It's a lot of production put in it.
I had a thought, 2 quick points, because I'm conscious we have a question in the chat. But I was having another mind wander recently, and I was thinking about what we do in improv, specifically with certain games and exercises and certain formats. And I was thinking, well, essentially you take a character and move that character in time and space and have that character be affected by another character or another situation. And these scenes happen to be improvised scenes. But I sort of had a moment and I thought to myself, is that not a play or a screenplay or any form of storytelling as it exists? Is that not it? And I think it's really interesting you say that. Matthias, because for example, if we take like anything where there's a character that comes back, I'm like, well, that is a scene by definition. There's some form of drama or dramatics in there. By drama, I don't mean conflict. I mean drama in the sense that there is some kind of tension that will build and release and build and release. And I'm like, well, that we already have that. I feel like it exists in a universal sense, like it's true in the earth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think connected to that, sorry, one more thought. I think perception is maybe there's a rush to get people on stage as well. There's like, seems to be like, we just took 1 term, 10 classes, let's put them on stage and play games like we did on the workshops for an audience. And then there might be people, it's the first time going to an improv show, and they might get that concept, that a perception of the shows kind of thing, going to the stage like with the big faces and stuff. And that people might never come back to, or not like anymore the idea of improv, because they link that to this kind of shows only.
I've been trying to have, I've taken over as the artistic director at ITS really recently. It's very new. And up until now, most of my job has been about like how to vax check people. But along that path, I've been really trying to connect with the company and the people that have been there for a long time privately, and ask them some questions. And the questions I've been trying to ask is, where would you like to see ITS in 5 years? Where would you like to see yourself in 5 years? And where would you like to see improv in 5 years? And interestingly, the answer I have the most difficulty getting a response to is, where would you like to see improv in 5 years? And I'm like, well, I don't know what I think about that, but there's something processing in there. And the other response I'm getting a lot is, and I don't mind saying this because I've had wildly different responses, but something common that's coming back, and maybe this has something to do with the cringe factor, is I'd like for improv to be taken seriously. And that's coming, but that might be the only response that's fairly common, actually. And I mean, my answer in many ways is, well, why do we consistently enter the stage smiling? Like, not that smiling is bad. I have a huge mouth, I'm like down with smiling, but I'm like, maybe something, the reason I say it is because if you enter the stage with a massive smile, then you set a tone, and it's hard to come back from that tone. And I find that, again, sorry to be like a personal sort of aesthetic thing, but I find that pretty cringy. Like,
yeah, a fake smile or a display smile, a
it's the display.
non-authentic smile.
That's a great phrase for it, isn't it? It's the display. This is me improvising, and
it's not an authentic connection with the audience. It's, I've been told to do this, and so it doesn't feel right because the audience is going, it doesn't feel right. I just want to pick up on what you were saying about the answer of taking improvisation seriously. So everyone here has worked in different forms of creative arts, different types of shows. And there's a way that you walk into the rehearsal room if you're doing a scripted piece. There's a way you walk into a rehearsal room if you're collaborating on a show, if you're doing circus, physical theater. You walk in the headset of, I am here to work with this group. I am here to create. Do improvisers walk into the rehearsal room with that prepared headspace, that artistic headspace, that looking at the possibilities, the obligations to each other, and the job at hand in the same way?
No.
I would go a step further back and say that I don't think a lot of improvisers walk into a rehearsal room. They walk into a jam session, or they walk into like, let's just meet up and play some games, or they'll walk into a class or a workshop, but they won't walk into a rehearsal room. Sorry, Tim, I cut you off.
Oh no, that's fine, Jim. I'll personalize this because I don't want to speak on behalf of other people. But as a teacher, even just having bags on stage and a bit of mess, it bothers me. But I'm a little OCD, and if I'm coming before a show and I'm cracking wise or goofing off or not doing the work to be present how I need to be to do the show I'd like to do and share with my colleagues, it's a fear response in me. So what I recognize in other people, I recognize in myself as a fear response. I know I'm, and it's shame with me. It's a big one. I'm not going to be enough tonight. I need to amp it up, or I'm too much. I need to dial it back. When perhaps, again, personally, the bravest thing, and which would serve the show the most, because bravery is our currency, is to be nervous, be a little bit afraid. And I liked how you talked about, Jim, the 4 minute, 3 minute, the 2 minute. My fear response is sleepiness. I get really sleepy in those 3 minutes, really, really sleepy. And then it switches on. But I recognize it now. That's fear. That's nerves. It doesn't feel like shaking, but my body's trying to disassociate. Get me out of here, man. I don't want to do this. Tonight's the night. You ruin everything. So just for myself, I don't think I have enough. And I'd like to more. Also cognizant not to put pressure on other people that they need to be professional in the way that I think I need to be professional, that it's a very personal thing. But I like working with Patti. I love that there's very clear standards that you can meet, and that's very reassuring. Then outside of that, with those clear standards, there's a lot of range for just the personal professionalism. My warm-ups chat backstage, I feel like, I can have a normal conversation with someone. I think I'm okay. Let's go do a show. But I'd be curious how other people walk into a space and what's challenging for them about that.
What I have to say about this, I think following up with what I mentioned before about sometimes rushing to get on people on stage, I think maybe we also tend to rush to get people in charge of putting shows on stage. So I think that people that might direct crews or troops to perform, they have this massive responsibility, and they need to also learn this and get more experience in this. And I'm not saying I have the answers or how to do that. It's just, I guess, it's time and practice and getting more familiar with this to make sure that when your performers come to the rehearsal room, the right atmosphere is there, everything's being taken care of, the mindset is correct to people to work, not to jam, which we might have the space for that in another moment, in another place. I think I personally struggle a lot with this, maybe as being younger than other people that I work with, or I'm normally very friendly and easygoing, but I'm quite strict when it comes to try to direct shows or troops in performing. But when it comes to be your friends, your mates that you normally hang out with, it's tough to cross that line, and it normally blends, and it's very tricky. I think this kind of things maybe comes with age and experience and exposure and people working with you. So I'm sure that different experiences, but that's what I've at least seen in different groups around the world, not just here, going through that tough times on finding the right perspective or preparation to face what's next, what's the workshop, what's the show, what's the rehearsal.
It makes me think of something that I'm trying to coin the exact right phrase, and I haven't got it bang on yet, but along the lines of toxic niceness or toxic friendliness, because our whole gig is trust. And I find it very interesting how quickly trust and friendliness can get confused, because then it's a barrier to real communication. It's a barrier to someone saying, hey, pull your head in, we're rehearsing. It's a barrier to so many things, because we're like mates, everyone's mates, and out comes the open mouth again because we're mates. And I'm like, well, actually rehearsing and doing the rehearsal, like doing the improv for a couple of hours, and that should be a pleasure. If that is not a pleasure on some level, then we've got a bigger problem. So it shouldn't be too awful to do a quick rehearsal, I think.
I would add on to that pleasure doesn't have to mean look at us laughing. Pleasure could be the pleasure of discovery, the pleasure of working on something to see what we can crack. the pleasure of shared minds tackling a problem, the pleasure of silence, the pleasure of learning how to create, a visual picture, the pleasure of how do we use our body. And I think people misinterpret, oh, it should be a pleasure, or, it should be fun with, we have to laugh a lot. There's other types of pleasure. There's other types of fun. And, so things like, what you're saying, the toxic happiness, things like applauding yourself as you walk on, that fits certain cultures, not all cultures. Right? But it's something that's taught as, this is what you should do. Applaud yourself when you walk on. I personally find it mostly really arrogant.
Maybe they did a great job of walking on stage.
Yeah,
Maybe they just crush it every time.
God, Patty's so negative.
I am, right? I get the logic behind it, but the logic behind it to me is also a logic that I go, that's a logic of a place or a style of work, which is absolutely fine. So use that approach and that style for that show with that logic. But I've also seen, in Australia, because with the tall poppy syndrome, I've seen groups walk on stage doing that for themselves, and audiences lean back and cross their arms and look at each other like, what are they on? Because of that, it's displayed. It's not authentic. There isn't warmth or energy. They're doing it because they were told. Which I think goes to that talk. It's a version of the toxic happiness. It's just displayed differently.
I think it's also related to, something that happened to me a few months ago is that I went to describe a person who I know through improvisation. We've met a couple of times at some workshops, and I went to find the word to describe that person. And immediately I went to like, oh, this is my friend. And I was like, well, they're not really my friend. Like, they're a colleague, really. But because we're both independent artists, I automatically put them in the bucket of friend. And, they're a perfectly lovely person. I've got no beef with them whatsoever. But there's sort of assumption that we're all friends, and whereas really we're colleagues in a way in certain contexts. And I think it's like you say, like the assumption that we're all going to get along and have a great time, and that I'm making it sound like it should be suffering. But you know what I mean, like automatically we're friends, automatically we're having like a social hangout at the same time as practicing our craft.
I think for me, I think that's such a beautiful example, Jim, because for me, you want to go to the balance of not being cliquey as well, but it immediately kills, because, when you have a real friendship in your personal life, there's a shorthand and there are assumptions that you make because you know each other, and you don't ask your partner what kind of coffee they have. And I feel like that the problem with that kind of presumption is that you stop listening. Like you get over the learning period, and when you walk onto a stage with someone, you've got a whole lot of learning to do, and you're sort of presuming things. And as soon as you start presuming things, you stop listening. And I feel like then I feel like we get into generic impro land and cringy posters,
If I could pick up on something that Matthias said, that when you're directing, you said that that you're quite strict when you're directing, and now I'm paraphrasing, that sometimes that may cause an imbalance in the room because people are friends, so they're coming in to have that social experience or to have fun times, and you're wanting to work on a show. And I think that collision happens a lot in improvisation. Some people are coming because they want to have the social experience and play, and some people are coming, the social experience and the play is a part of it, but they're also focused on what can we achieve or do or work on. So Matthias, how do you deal with that? How do you reset the room to a place to work the way you would like?
I think this is an ongoing thing that we might keep discovering. And recently we've been discovering even on online stuff, like some get-togethers or some jams online. Not that I've been doing much of that, but whenever that happens too, it's like, I think it also depends definitely on the experience of the group, how well they know each other, how long they've been working together, because I work with different troops, even started some troops in other places as well. And people that know each other and they've worked for years in different shows, they know how to switch to that. Okay, we're now getting ready for a show. Now we're rehearsing. And when it's over, it's over. 2 hours after that. And now we go to the drinks and the food and order some food, and that's fine. But then maybe with groups that are maybe starting, or like intro to improv, or the first 101, 201, that you become friends with them as well, and you want to maybe start preparing for shows. This maybe links to what I mentioned before, that shows tend to be this kind of like workshop with audience. And even sometimes they're even promoted like that. Well, we're going to have like an open session, like with audience, and we're just going to be like a workshop thing. So how can you prepare differently for something that we just do as every week? I guess this comes in when you start working on more specific formats or shows that require maybe more concentration or more discipline, or a lot of repeats stuff. Improvisers, we're not used to repeat stuff, right? So when it comes to that, I think that's training somehow gets into that mood. It's a challenge. I don't know if I have the answer for that. I'm still figuring it out. I guess sometimes setting a tone helps, not saying it in a bad way, but like, okay, maybe you close the door of the venue when you're about to get in, right? So anyone that comes later, just send me a message and we'll figure some good time to get it in. Just start with the classic circle, and that's the moment where we start. Everything else, it's aside. We keep our things outside the circle and we start working on this. And when you have a large group of 15 or 20 plus people, it's very challenging. Especially working with Latin American people, it's always been a challenge, because we're also like sparkly and chatty and want to, how have you been doing? I haven't seen you in a long time. You have to repeat many times. Okay, it's time to work. It's time to get it ready. So yeah, that's a very good point also on the multicultural as well. Some of them are ready to work, and maybe 5 minutes before it starts, they're already ready in the rehearsal room. Some of them might be 10 minutes late. So it's always a challenge.
That's really interesting. That just reminded me, Matthias, I have been working on a project recently, which was simultaneously extremely satisfying and extremely challenging. And it was a large-scale collaboration with the Saudi Arabian Department of Education and an art center there called ITHRA. And the men and women were divided into two. We were going to go to Saudi Arabia, but in fact we had to go online for all the usual reasons. And so we had to teach some basic performance skills, improvisation, and then some applied improvisation stuff moving into devising and other areas. And every single cultural problem you can imagine was there in full force. Not a problem, but every single cultural difference was there in full force. And what was so interesting when we talk about how to start in a space is, and people's expectations, we had to do a lot of work around setting expectations, as you would in a level 1 improv class, right? And equally, we did a lot of cultural training, and coming back from that, they just said to us, you can't go in with your Western, 7 o'clock, you're late, let's go. They said that you can't, you will lose them, they won't listen to you. And they were like, you simultaneously have to be the boss. And we were like, oh, it's more like a sharing thing. And they were like, no, you have to be the boss. But you also have to talk a bit about your family and hear about theirs. And we had this like extremely tight schedule. And they were like, so you've just lost 20 minutes of your schedule, because every single session is going to be a little bit of talk about your family. And sure enough, I was like, absolutely, I'm listening to everything you're saying, except in the back of my head, I was like, not on my ship. And sure enough, you did. I talked about my family. I showed some photos. I got my broom out, long story at one stage. And and I met their children who would come in and say hello. And then once we had gone through that, we could work. And it was very clear that we had to figure out how to set up this class, these people, this class, how it was working. And I don't know what I think about any of that yet, except that it's just very interesting from my point of view.
Absolutely. For me personally, the thing that I found really helps being able to like separate the social and work side of things is the most common problem I see is people hanging out in the room where you're going to do the rehearsal and then trying to start a rehearsal in that same room, because people just carry on chatting. So meet outside, have your chat there. Okay, we're going into the room. Great, let's start. And it's just a psychological thing of like, we're going into a different space. We're doing a different thing.
That's great.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
The thing is that, especially when you work in a theater with other groups that share the same performers, and you're the only one doing that. So for example, other groups will say, different directors and teachers, they will open the doors already. Yeah, just get together there and we meet in 5 minutes. So kind of like you have to break with that, but also train other directors and coaches, I guess. That also helps.
Absolutely.
We'll go to audience questions in just a second. We've got a few coming in. Don't forget that you can put them in the Q&A box that's down at the bottom of your screen. Patti, do you have another question that you'd like to ask our panel? Because I have one if you don't.
Go for it.
Okay, fantastic. This is sort of following on a little bit from what we were just talking about, which is in Australia and New Zealand, there are some workshops and courses where the students taking the class will perform at the end of the course. I've taught some, I will teach more in the future. There comes an interesting point for me though, where the director or the teacher of those performances gets paid because the students are paying for the class. But then the students are performing 1, 2, 3, 4 shows for a paying audience, where the box office doesn't necessarily return to them as students. They're getting paid in experience. And
it's exposure, Jim, exposure.
And there's a tension there for me about yes, the teacher deserves to get paid for their time teaching and directing, but also these students are performing. What principles do you use in your work to try and manage this sort of balance between teaching, learning, and the economics of it as well?
Can I jump in? Yeah.
Yes.
So Impro Melbourne has a couple of courses which are based on performance experience. And one goes 8 weeks of training and rehearsal, and then 1 performance. So it's, a showing of the work. There's another one that has, I believe I'm getting this right, 5 rehearsals and then 4 performances, or 5 and 3. And the teacher is still getting paid during those performances. However, the teacher is getting paid because they're handling the technical, getting everybody ready to perform, doing notes on the show, and giving feedback after. So it's not a lead up to a show, go play, and the teacher's just in the room. The teacher is still actively using that experience as a learning experience. To kind of help bridge some of the gap that Matthias was talking about earlier, that, you have students and maybe we put them on stage too quickly sometimes, or they're not as prepared, or they don't understand the mechanics of theater. So this helps bridge that gap a little bit. There are different models that are used at different festivals as well. Very few people get paid to perform improvisation, which is a problem globally, But if we're not taking our work with responsibility, walking into the rehearsal room, that gap from not being responsible walking into a rehearsal room to people being paid for the work, there's an accountability factor in there. So I personally don't have an issue with students being able to perform shows, that they get experience as long as there's experience and guidance and it is a learning experience. So they're still paying for a learning experience, and box office goes to the costs of venue and so forth to help be able to provide that opportunity for students. That's just my personal opinion.
Thank you. Any others?
Yeah, second everything Patti said. I guess always depends on the venue, on the company, on the show itself. I had multiple different experiences. Some of them very exactly like Patti described. Some of them might be groups that you start and you with the goal in mind, maybe to put a show on stage, and you prepare for that, like you said, more professionally, maybe for months, and then kind of like a Robin Hood at the end. So we all split the profits or whatever share we have evenly after paying all the costs and promotion and venue. I think this should be talks beforehand, regardless what the deal is. So when everyone's on the same page, knowing that like maybe just Patti describing that to the group of performers before going to that show, before even starting the preparation for that, saying that this is how we're breaking down the box office, and this is what we're covering for the teacher and director and the tech and everything in the venue. And this is why maybe we don't get paid, or performers don't get paid, and maybe give a bit more context that normally that's truly probably what happens everywhere in the world at the moment, or forever. But still being a learning experience and getting more experience. I think that if you're okay with that, then and everyone's okay. If you're not, maybe you don't get to perform, and that's fine. I guess that's completely fine. But if you all agree on the same page, then it's a great way to get predisposed to work on that and to enjoy it safely and have a good experience, I think.
Mm. To flip the coin, there are environments where, classes are set up, there's a show or shows at the end, and it does feel like, because of the cost of the ticket and maybe the revenue made at the bar, that it's less about the students having a learning experience and more about the company profiting on the fact that those students are going to bring their family and friends and a new audience. And it's a fine line between, is it a learning experience for them? Because the promotional material might be the same, but it's going to be the ethics of the company behind the decision that really needs to be called into question. Because if you're only creating that to make money off of the bar and get new audience, then you're not being honest and authentic with your students. That bugs me a little. It bugs me a lot. Not a little, it bugs me. But yeah.
I think facilitating a performative, as Patti was saying, a performative learning experience is a great idea myself. I think it should happen, but I think that particularly once you start to get regulars, students who are coming back again and again, and I think you have to, as we all said, we understand that nobody really gets paid. So I think it's about and it might help with lifting that rehearsal attitude and lifting that sort of, dare I say the word, professional kind of attitude towards what they're doing. Maybe it's about billing people as they are and giving due course to them in the same way that I think about a support act to a band or a high level comic. Even if you're a support act, that's still there's a level of professionalism there. And I think that trying to give students who are in a situation where they're working hard for the company, it's about not patting them on the head and doing those ones. And I think the second that those students are billed in an appropriate fashion and treated in an appropriate fashion, and the expectation on them becomes higher, then they'll lift. It's maybe a good metaphor is like using lights in the theatre. You know, you can go into the theatre with the lights up and you do something, but as soon as the lights change, the magic happens. It's the magic world we can't talk about, you know, like it's so I feel like there has to be a respect. Like I guess what I'm trying to say, it's okay for an improviser to be a new improviser, and it's okay for them to be new. It doesn't mean they shouldn't be treated as an improviser, you know, like, because otherwise you're left with the question, well, at what point do I not pat you condescendingly on the head and go, thanks for bringing your mum, you know, like.
Tim, is there anything you'd like to add before we move on?
No, I have no general thoughts, but I'm thinking about it, but nothing I can express at the moment. Thanks for asking.
Excellent. Well, maybe you'll have some thoughts to our first question from the audience, which comes from Anna Renz.
Anna's here.
Nice, nice to see. Anna asks, I'm going to put some words in Anna's mouth and rephrase the question. But a lot of what we've talked about so far has been dunking on various things and dunking on the Australasian improv scene. What are some things that we can be proud of? What are we great at? What should we be proud of that we do well?
Do we think we're dunking?
We've sort of had to go a little bit at like the way that we like don't sort of like treat our rehearsal rooms professionally sometimes. I was using dunking kind of jokingly.
Yeah.
But to Anna's question, what should we be proud of?
So I do want to get to Anna's question, but I don't think we're dunking. I think we're just being honest with the experience. And I don't think we should shy away from that. And I also don't think it's unique to Australia and New Zealand. This is something that's happening globally. So I don't feel that we're dunking on our communities. I think we're just talking about our experiences that we're seeing in the room. And it's not a negative to say, hey, we're going to use the word professional. Hey, we're actually asking people to have standards about the work. Hey, you know, if you're coming into a rehearsal room, you know, come in with that mindset. I don't think those are negative things. I think they're really positive things. And the reason we don't ask those questions is why, when Ali says, where do you want impro to be in 5 years? No one can answer it because nobody's going into the rehearsal room to actually look at what we can do with improvisation. So I think it circles back around, and we should talk about all the really good things.
I think it also circles back around to everything needing to be nice and everyone needing to get along, which comes back to, as Tim was saying, shame. So everything is circular.
I think I'm interested. I like how because I'm Australian, I like how we come at genre, because I think we're kind of shy about our own cultural story and our own genres that would emerge from it. So we do, in my experience, come at genres with a kind of innocent blank slate. And I do enjoy the work that comes from that. I think that's what will come to mind when I'm trying to think, oh, Australian improv. I mean, I'd love to do just shows about us, really, just, you know, especially coming out of like this great shutdown and shows about solitude and how has that affected us collectively, individually. But I like how we do genre. There's something naive about it that I find endearing. And I hope that's not a patronizing term, because I really enjoy seeing that innocence on stage because it's authentic. So there's something about our genre work I really enjoy.
Anyone else?
I don't know if I'm entitled to answer this question. Sorry. I don't consider myself Australian. I'm not even New Zealander. I mean, it's my second home, but I wouldn't be able to say anything on behalf of New Zealanders and Australians.
But I think coming in from a different community and seeing the work here, you know, seeing the differences and the similarities, and looking at, what is New Zealand improvisation? How would you describe to an Argentinian improviser how New Zealanders improvise? What is the improvisation of New Zealand or Australia? What are the strengths? So I do think you're placed to answer it if you have an answer, and it's okay if you don't.
Yeah, I think I was trying to compare like what things I can find here, maybe not in other countries, in improvisers or in groups. I think there are a lot of common things that I found also at home in Argentina. Like I find here also that playfulness and that commitment from people that really like the art form. Sometimes it feels like it's you're 100% in or you're not, kind of in a thing with improv, right? So the people that are really into it, they're super into it. They're like, it's like a cult. And everyone around, they will be your best mates. Maybe what Jim mentioned, you will quickly turn into best mates and flatmates, or sharing a bubble in lockdown, and that happens. So I think and I love that. And I love that also happens here. And I can see that transferring to the stage. I know that you can trust that people when you're on stage, those people you've been working on, people you've been sharing moments with and that trusts, which I think is common in probably most countries that plays improv. So trying to find specific stuff about New Zealand or maybe Australia as well, since I know a few Australian improvisers. Very versatile. I think I agree also with Tim that genre is very strong. Genre play is very, very strong. What I've seen here in New Zealand and Australia. Something that, for example, at least in Argentina, we are not very experienced, at least in my hometown. It's something that we might not have the same exposure as Anglo-Saxon countries with some specific literature genres and movie genres. Maybe we have different ones that's are not necessarily that easy to put on stage, the more local ones or more traditional ones that we have. So I definitely see that and the commitment for that. And I think that's very, very good.
Just to pick up on what Matthias said at the beginning is I love Australians' playfulness, like the to sort of be a bit naff about it. There is a bit of a have a go sense. And I think that's obviously really, really helpful. That's been my experience anyway. And I think that's great. I've definitely seen some like really, really new people who were shaking with fear, but kind of had to go. And I think that's culturally exciting,
And to me, that's huge because outside of improv here in New Zealand, for example, people are quite distant colds, if you ask me, compared maybe to Latin America. So, but when I'm in an improv theater here in Auckland or in Wellington, which I love every time I can go there, I feel home. I feel like this is home. This is how we treat each other at home as well, with this being so kind and so humble at the same time, and just so open to learn from their experience and what they have to share with you. And maybe in other environments, I don't necessarily feel that's here. So that for me, improv in general here made it so much easier for me to feel like this is a place I could live.
I don't know, actually, to be honest. And that's not a negative. Because I do see a lot of the work being anchored in work that was created overseas and then brought here and shared here, and then it's an extension of, it's hard for me to see it as Australian, right? So, theater sports was brought here, the Herald was brought here, a lot of the genre work was brought here. So the sparks of the seeds have come from overseas here, and then Australian improvisers have worked on it and put their own stamp on it, and created within that. So I agree with Tim that there's a different way, there's a different style of genre work here within the genre work, and I agree that it would be really nice to see Australian and New Zealand improvisers claim their own culture and do their own genres and do their shows that represent that. There are stories that need to be told. And I think that would be a wonderful thing to see, and would be very welcomed on the international stage. And I know like some Australian, New Zealand improvisers would say, oh, well, nobody knows our playwrights. Well, there's countries where people don't know Jane Austen, and the group will show up and they'll do a Jane Austen at that festival, and the audience goes, okay, that's what that is, and they learn as it's happening. So yeah, there'd be a learning curve. Take that into consideration when you're rehearsing it. How do you put the audience in the space so they are available to the work that you're presenting? I'd like to see that.
I think that's such an exciting prospect, and I think part of the reason people don't know Australian playwrights is because Australians won't talk about them. And as Tim was saying, being able to create an improv show around, solitude, that might be one of the most exciting things that I can think of in terms of improv. And it reminds me, actually, I did some training in Paris years ago, and we had to create a show, not a show, like for a showing to be, assessed. But the theme was solitude. And I can't ever imagine that happening here. And it was so hard. And I put to somebody the other day, there's a poem that I just dream about. I think it's so beautiful. And this is the crux of the poem. I'll paraphrase to make it fast. But there's a guy, he's very depressed. He jumps off the building to kill himself. And as he goes down, he sees all of the little moments of life happening in the windows. And then he lands on the ground and dies. And it's too late because he saw it too late. And I thought this was an ingenious starting point for an improv show. And I said it to someone and they just looked at me like I was a cracker. But I was like, oh, but it could be funny. It could be really funny. Like, imagine all the moments of life that could be happening. That in terms of whatever format, I don't know, whatever format you want, I was like, there's literally no bar on what could be happening in those rooms. Anything you want. And I was like, that would be a genuine expression of what I want to do, of Australian improv, because I'm Australian. And I find that way more interesting than, constantly trying to hang on to a rule that is made somewhere.
Ellie, I want to get in a room and do that now. It's like, let's go.
Isn't that? I should. I'll send through the actual poem because it's short and magnificent, and I in fact, dang it, I'm going to make that show.
Nice.
I might perform to a room of one, but that's okay.
That's solitude. Make it a design choice. It's like,
definitely. Sorry, Jim.
My company Jetpack, we used to do shows that were for audiences of 6 or 3 or something, and so we could very easily say that we'd sold out shows because, but also when social distancing came in and people say, how are we going to perform a show to 50 people? Like 50 people? Come on. I'm going to circle back around, Matthias, you were talking before about your perspective as an Argentinian coming to live in Australia, in Aotearoa, sorry. There's a question here from Christoph, who asks, Christoph says, to me, Argentina and Argentinian arts are characterized as passionate, free, and dangerous. He wants to know, is that your experience? And how does that compare with Australia and New Zealand?
Interesting. Yeah, I agree. I think it's probably one of the biggest challenges that I'm still facing, having to adapt to different style of doing improv. Maybe because of the groups that I've been playing with since I came here. Maybe, I don't know, that I cannot talk about experience that I haven't had. But from the ones that I had, it was a big gap. I think I was more used to be or even watch improv that was maybe super raw and emotional and physical, and it was an experience. It was an experience. We were not necessarily aiming for fun and comedy. We're just aiming to tell stories, which I'm not saying is not happening here, but maybe including or involving more senses to it and more skills and more tools. And of course, that takes more preparation maybe as well. But then we never, I think, in my opinion, we never had that cringy effects in the audience. We were selling out for 400 people every Sunday, and they were coming every Sunday to watch scenes. That they were just like, it was improv match, but the quality of the scenes was like taken out from a play. And we were wearing like football shirts or color shirt, you know, but that didn't matter. People would just really, really deep dive in what you were trying to tell. And people were like cheering and laughing, sometimes even being touched and you know, and crying sometimes, or goosebumps. Yeah, I didn't get goosebumps now. So I think that's coming here, and my first shock was like, oh, this is just 11s. People just talking 11s, you know, and I struggle with that at the beginning. Then you learn different skills that goes with that, and it's not right or wrong, it's not better or worse, it's just more. So you get more skills, you get a bigger now skill sets that when I go back home and I do improv there, I bring things that I learned here or in other countries that they don't know about maybe. That different, like the width, the quick, the pace, that's the lightning rounds that you might have some scenes. So it's interesting actually that I had a teacher in Copenhagen Festival, Greg Krakowski. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name wrong, but he had this scene study thing, and it will give you a feedback individually after some scenes. And he told me, he gave me a beautiful feedback and said, I think you're very good, very talented, but you won't always have that time to find that scene. You have sometimes just be there quickly and find the scene there. And I think that's a great analogy of how I was maybe doing back home and how I find it when I came here.
Normally this is the point where I would throw to other people on the panel, but I suppose, what are your collective perspectives on Argentinian improv? It's maybe a bit of a loaded question. I might move, well, I suppose I can ask a slightly related question to Ali, is that you've been working with improvisation for years and years and years, but a lot of it has been sort of, from my understanding, outside the sort of like sphere of capital I improvisation performed as improv with the posters. What's been your experience moving into that space, as the academics would say?
I need to preface this by saying, now that I've slagged off those posters, if anybody goes onto my Facebook page, you'll see a picture of one of my characters who's doing this. So I need to...
Outrageous.
I need to confess to that. My mind is actually almost blown. I have so many thoughts, and everything is extremely unprocessed, but very exciting nonetheless. And I guess one of the things that's sort of coming through the most is how something that I always think and that I'm desperately sick of is in my experience, like, and I work across a lot of things, like with a lot of different kinds of artists, and I'm always there in one way or another in an improvisational capacity to either do or teach, and that improvisation will manifest in any number of different ways. And something I always notice is the clowns think they're better than the improvisers, and the actors think they're better than the freaking clowns, and the music theatre people think they're better than everyone, and the opera people have ascended to the heavens. And as I make my way through those, communities, all I keep hearing is the exact same thing in terms of the shared language, in terms of the thing that everybody's after. And, maybe a really famous thing is, the clowns hate the actors and the actors hate the clowns. Do you know what I mean? And then there's Bill Irwin, the famous clown and actor and improviser. And he just goes, what the problem with these clowns is? They can't act. And so it's so interesting, because You know, my introduction to ITS was Actors Accelerator level 1 and 2, and that's because I started to think I was doing so much teaching that my chops were getting really dulled, and I could feel it. I was like, I could just feel it. I was like, you are dull. Your senses are dulled. So I like enrolled in a class, you know, and that's how I was introduced to it. So I did level 1 and 2, and now I'm in level 4. And it's great. But for example, I did a little experiment in my level 3 class, I do believe, where I would go to my class on a Monday, whatever exercise they taught me, and the exercises I am very familiar with because they are permeations of improvisation. And then on Wednesday and Thursday, I'd work with like professional artists, and I would take that exercise, pull it apart, put it back together, and like try and get what I want out of it. And then on Thursday night, I was teaching like beginner improvisation at a whole other school. So I would take it back, and they were baby beginners, like need to speak in front of other people, like, you know, like scared beginners. And so I'd like just try and stretch it out. And then I started to realize that everything I was doing in every area of my life was kind of a permeation of some basic principles, the centerpiece of those being listen to somebody else. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, I've had some like insanely interesting conversations with really amazing people, Patti Stiles being one of them, who generously gave me her time just so I could talk to someone who was experienced. So I guess what's interesting for me at the moment is that I'm looking towards programming. You know, what's the year going to look like? What shows are going up? And I'm looking towards things which are really important to me, like making sure that our faculty have opportunities to sharpen their skills, you know, and making sure they're making sure that our students have pathways, that our students, that we can get to somewhere where we can look at a student and say, it's beautiful improvisation you do, but I can't understand a word you're saying. You know? And to be able to have that kind of honesty with people. And I think our tutors, I'm so struck by our tutors. Sorry, I just dropped my pile of books. Our tutors are so special, like they're so good. And I've been in a few classes, I've been checking out lots of things. They're so good and they're so different. And I want to encourage that difference. I guess what I'm really thinking about at the moment is how can I like really empower those tutors to be true to the identity of ITS and really be true to their own identity as artists. And I'm not afraid of the word artists or professionals, BTW. Like I am team that, and I'm team that because I have a mentor, a performance mentor, and I see him often, and I make sure that I get, you know, a fairly regular bollocking so that it just keeps me on edge a little bit. And he says to me all the time, creativity and art is everywhere. It's in STEM, it's in science, it's in how you purchase something at the supermarket. And he's always reminding me of that. So I'm not afraid of those words because I believe that our level 1 students who are accountants are also artists, because why else would they be there? And they also need to improve their speaking skills because, you know, they need to do Zoom presentations, but they came to ITS to do that.
It's interesting.
Yeah, no, that's me done.
What you just said about, you know, the artist in the space for artists, because it kind of links to a question that we have, Jim. Take it away.
Excellent. Are you talking about the one
from Delta?
Yes.
Delia, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, Delia.
So this will be our last question, I think. This question is from Delia. which says, Delia says, I love improv and I've been doing it for 13 years, both as a trainer and as a performer. But I really feel the need to do it in a professional environment. And there is not enough of that attitude in my country for that to happen. Maybe this need of mine also stems from my background as an actress. Who knows? But my question is, if one would want to be a permanent cast member of an improv theatre, what would you recommend? What theatres, what trajectory, what's the first step? Thank you, Delia.
It's a question that a lot of people are asking themselves for many, many years, right? It's a tough one. I would say that it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to join a theater in order to do this. I think it might be trying to find first what you want to do, because not just for the money, of course, being professional, but something that you enjoy doing, and be surrounded by the people likewise. They think the same way and they have the same goals, and they like the same style of shows or performing or this different disciplines of improv, which is already rare enough to find in that specific place that you are. So good luck on that. But I think that it takes some time, maybe first defining that and then meeting people. And then through that, you will find something that defines that connection with someone or a group of people. And if you're disciplined and you're dedicated and you have a nice product that markets well, I know it's a combination of things. I think it's possible. I think it's very possible. It just takes time and patience.
I'm quite struck actually by a lot of messages that I field of a similar nature, although your message, Delia, is quite different to what I'm about to reference. But the essential theme I seem to be getting a lot at the moment is, I want to do more performing. Can you please make some more performance opportunities for me? And in my professional life, I've never done anything except performance-related things. And I can say that all of the good things I've ever done that have taken, first of all, been creatively satisfying and that I was proud of, and secondly, that maybe took me to another level of my career or another place in my career, I made like 100% of the time. And I think that with improv, it's so important to stand up and make your own thing and put it up in a pub or a library. The City of Sydney Library, if you're in Sydney, they have a libraries program. You can put whatever you want in there. Dancers have done stuff in the different libraries. Like seeing an improv show in one of the City of Sydney libraries would be tip top. You just have to apply for the program. And I think the benefit to improv, to the craft of improv, which comes from people making their own stuff, is that they learn stuff, because maybe you do have to do it in a library because that's where you have to do it. Or maybe you have to do it on a Thursday night at 8 because that's what's available at the pub and it's really noisy at that time. So you have to adjust your show. So you get those incidental discoveries, which you wouldn't have. And maybe you don't want to do that forever, but and because you're so invested in it, because you made it and it matters how much money you spend on the sombrero or whatever, there's this little extra energy there, that mysterious world that we can't talk about, that extra thing, because it matters, because you did it. So I think you should make a show. That's what I think.
I would 100% agree with Ali about making your own opportunities, because partly because the opportunities aren't necessarily going to come your way, because the number of people I could name, let alone know personally, who are professional permanent cast members of improv theatre companies, that's one hand. So partly make your own opportunities, but also the Dutch football team, I think it was, they created the system called Total Football, where everyone on the team would know how to play in every position. Everyone could be an attacker, a defender, a goalkeeper, whatever it was, because it helped you know how the whole team worked better. And putting on your own shows, in my experience, gives you that same thing. You learn how to work a budget, you learn how to operate a lighting desk, you learn how to repaint the stage, all of those things, and they make you a much more well-rounded theatre maker. They'll also get you in demand because people want producers, they want lighting operators, and that experience will help get you out there, I guess.
You know what I found really interesting is we had a course at ITS, and maybe it'll come back, but it's not currently on sale, which was I think it was 1 day, and it was like producing your own improv show. And for the number of inquiries I get about how do I get opportunities, to my knowledge, that course never ran once. It never had enough enrollments.
Wow.
And I find that really interesting, you know?
Couldn't recommend any particular companies. I mean, things that came to mind, I don't know where Delia is. When I see the work of Impro Theatre and Unexpected Productions, that's kind of an energy I like seeing. But I think when it was such a clear statement that was read there, and I heard ambition, aspiration for clarity, and perhaps some frustration, and I think those emotions themselves are a really strong place to actually create a show from. So I echo my colleagues' things. Find some people who light you up and challenge you, spend as much time in a room creating, and come from that point that you're searching for some sort of meaningful place to put what you have to say. Go ahead and say it. That desire itself is very interesting to me. Like, I'd come and see that show about a person trying to understand, where do I say this? What have I got to say? I think this is a real fuel source just in that statement alone that's worthy of exploration, if that interests you, Delia.
I'd add on that I agree with what everybody said. Taking the opportunity to create your own work, you learn a lot. You really learn a lot. And the reasons that you go into doing it might change at the end, where you go, no, actually, the reasons I want to do this is actually, but that's a good learning. It's part of the process. Other things you could do, be curious. You said you're an actor, so you understand the value of diversifying skills, being curious, learning from a lot of resources so that you have a wide range of knowledge that you can bring to your performance. You can create a solo show, or you just need one other person. So when we talk about creating a show, it doesn't have to be, a group, a company of 10 people that you're trying to find. It could be yourself, and ask a director to come in and try some ideas out. But as you're exploring improvisation, ask yourself, what is it that you want to create? What speaks to you? What type of work, as Tim said, lights you up, fires you up? And then follow that. Email teachers in different countries, ask them, what they would recommend, or look up different companies, research companies that do this type of work that you would like to do. If you're really dedicated to improvisation and you're going, I'd like this to be my career, and you're willing to maybe move cities to work with a group that could really challenge and inspire, do the homework. Then, maybe take a holiday and go there and take a weekend course, introduce yourself, get a feeling of the improv community in general. People are happy to share their opinions and their ideas and to chat. There's a lot of online forums and groups that you could say, hey, I really like this type of work. Who's doing it in this country or this city? The sad thing would be to let the fire go out because there's obstacles. A lot of the improvisation games that exist because they were invented to solve problems. Viola and Keith in particular, they'd encounter problems in the room and they try to find a game or create a game to solve that problem. So you've got a problem. What's the game? What's the solution to solve it? May not be easy, but you're definitely going to learn a huge amount from it.
Mm.
And speaking of learning a huge amount, that is what I have done, and I'm sure all of our audience have done during this, the 4th episode of Speak Freely. Would you all please join me in thanking our panelists, Alison Bennett, Tim Redmond, and Matthias Avoca, and my co-host, Patti Stiles. I would like to thank Reese O'Terry and Panford Reed for their help in putting this event on. There may be more Speaks Freely, not sure, in the future. So keep an eye on Impro Melbourne's social media. And in general, have a wonderful day. Go out there, make some art, and don't let the fire go out. Have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to talking with you again sometime soon.
Thank you
Yay.
so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.